A lot of times I'll pose a question to my patients. So what organ system has the most testosterone receptors? And they always get it wrong. They say the muscles. And it's like, the next day was my swing shift. And I went in on a swing shift, and the first patient they handed me was an EKG of a guy who was 47 having a heart attack.
You are entering lifestyle dentist territory where healthy, wealthy, generous dentists choose to live epic lives on their terms with freedom and fulfillment. I'm your host, Dr. Garth Hatch. Buckle up for another exciting episode.
Hello, lifestyle dentists. I'm super excited for our episode today with Dr. Bob Letta. Bob is an amazing, you'll hear his journey, but he's an MD. He's a longevity specialist, lives in Alaska, has an awesome lodge where they do great fishing expeditions. He's got his own health and wellness longevity spa and equipment, and where they can do full workups in Alaska. So pretty amazing. Do a fishing / longevity visit with him. And also just a good personal friend. We're both in a mastermind called Go Business together. And Bob is just living right, running on all four cylinders, or 8 cylinders, I should say, because you're killing it, Bob. And plus you've got top quality haircut too, just like I do. So,
Oh man, I was so fortunate that I had male pattern baldness, because had I not, I would have never gone to this. I wouldn't have done it to be trendy. And then once I realized just how much easier it is to just shave your head, and you and I have round heads, and there's some guys that are not going to be happy. I mean, one of my good friends did it. And I'm like, yeah, because he had male pattern baldness. And I'm like, you got like bumps on the back of your head that are so Cro-Magnon looking. Grow the hair back, man. It's not a good look for you. I mean, I'm just being honest,
It is true. So, some people were blessed with a good shaped head and bald works, and other times it's not as friendly, but you're running it, man. You're looking good. So, well, hey, just to get to know Dr. Letta, Bob, would you mind giving us a little background about yourself? I know quite a bit about you, but, past both as an MD and what led you down this longevity.
Yeah, it'd take a little while, but, I'll start at the beginning because it's important. I mean, to establish that I'm achieving longevity with some risks, Grew up in a household with 2-3 pack a day smokers. So, my summer vacations in Texas were a 3-hour drive somewhere with the air conditioning on and the windows rolled up and 4 kids bathed in cigarette smoke. None of us adopted that habit, by the way. I was lucky. At about age 12, for some reason, back of Boy's Life magazine, I saw an article, Joe Weider thing, and it appealed to me to have a physique that, looked good. I often joke that I say I got the vanity gene, and thank God, because I wanted to look like that. So I asked for a weight set at 12. And, I've lifted weights since I was 12 years old with very few hiatuses, injury and, first year residency. I think I tapped out on that one. And third year of medical school, not as good as the other 3 years, but I mean, pretty much been a lifelong resistance trainer and always done some cardio, and sort of progressed through life, went into medicine after getting talked out of fisheries biology by professors because I was pretty good in the sciences. And they're like, you're not going to make a living. Why don't you become a doctor or an engineer or something like that? You're smart. Okay. Went through the my mom was a nurse. So I thought, all right, I'll take the MCAT. I scored really high on it and pretty much could get into anywhere I wanted to go. I ended up at University of Texas Southwestern Medical School in Dallas, one of the top 5 med schools in the country. And I was depressed because I realized pretty quickly I wasn't going to learn about health. They didn't teach me anything about health. It was immediately diving into disease. And that's a product of the fact that med school curriculum is controlled by the pharmaceutical industry, as is the rest of the government, for that matter. I mean, at the granular level, it's the most powerful force in the government. There's too much profit in disease to worry about health. And in fact, it's the opposite of their goal, because if you become healthy, you take away permanent customers of the pharmaceutical industry. And I started to recognize that early on, but you're augured in. You've just paid for the first year of medical school. You drop out, you got bills and no way to make them. So I muddled through and tried to figure out what I was going to do. I was very fortunate in that last year of college, I was teaching a lab for my anatomy and physiology lab, which was the ones the nursing students took, So yeah, I'm a scum. But, so I'm teaching the lab for the year, and my professor he goes, hey, I got to go to Alaska this winter. And I'm like, Alaska? what do you do there? He goes, all the other docs, or all the other teachers typically, professors typically, do summer school, but I go up there and commercial salmon fish. And he goes, Professor Warnock used to be my deckhand, but he and I got in a fight after 9 years, so I'm looking for a deckhand. Well, I was my summer jobs were always commercial deckhanding on a charter fishing boat out of Freeport, Texas. So, I grew up on boats, never been seasick. So I said, man, I don't know anything about salmon fishing, but I'm boat worthy. Can't get me sick. He gave me the job. I came up here in 1986. And I tell you, when I stepped off the plane on June 22nd at 11:30 at night, and the sun was setting behind the Alaska range, and I went, this is where I'm living. And I knew it like, the sun's coming up tomorrow. There was conviction. There was no way I wasn't living in Alaska. It had me at that. Spent awesome. 2 months, commercial salmon fished, fell in love with the Kenai Peninsula, and went off to meds. Figured out I was going to learn about disease instead of health, dealt with it, figured out how to make a living, conceived of the concept of building a fishing lodge. I was kind of a guide since I was 5 years old. My dad had taught me to fish. A lot of other kids had dads who didn't fish. And it was like I started guiding when I was little, Cool. Not for pay, but I was always wanting to take friends and show them what I knew. So I was that was in my DNA, I guess. So I moved on to, getting up here and built a fishing lodge. Right after I got up here, I was fortunate there was an ER opening on the Kenai Peninsula, which was where I had commercial fished. It's what Alaska was to me. So all those stars aligned. I had a job here and started right out of residency. And, the reason I chose ER, I kind of was a surgeon, I think, genetically, but I looked at those guys and they spent way too much time in the hospital. And I already realized I didn't really like sick people and I didn't really like hospitals. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of like, not a great thing to be a doctor. Well, who spends the least time in the hospital? And it's like ER docs. They work like 12 shifts a month. So that allowed me to have a practice and build a fishing lodge and actually be a guide for the fishing lodge at the same time. So I started that process and the lodge was relatively successful through, not being a great marketer, but good enough. And because we provided good service, we had good repeat clientele. And then I had this windfall a few years back where these kids came up to the lodge and did a YouTube video. And the YouTube video turned into, a moonshot. 2.9 million views now, and all of a sudden we don't have to advertise anymore. Well, that YouTube video got me discovered by some producers who said, hey, we want to do a show about you, this doctor who lives in Alaska, flies bush planes around. We want to do a reality TV show. So that happened last year, and those episodes drop on February 20th on the Outdoor Channel. So that's kind of the walk that direction and the whole lodge thing, which is going phenomenal now, Ever since that YouTube video dropped, our bookings did so good that we paid off all our debt on the lodge free and clear. It's starting to be fun. And actually, I'm looking at I'm probably going to get some money out of the lodge itself instead of just working for it. Normally, I'm paying myself to go do the guiding like I would else. So that's kind of cool. But the medicine side of things, I practice ER. I probably saw 60,000 patients. I never talked to a lawyer and hopefully won't ever. I'm done with conventional medicine at this point. 13 years ago, I was 47. I did marry a younger lady. We had a 1-year-old and between the two of us, a total of 5 kids at that point. And I was starting to run out of steam. I was the director of EMS on the Kenai Peninsula. At one period, I was the director in the ER, but I think I had given that up by this time. And, running a full ER practice of 12 shifts a month and having a fishing lodge and the marketing and in the summer going every day. And I woke up one morning and I looked over the mountain range from my bedroom window, a bright sunny day, and my job is to go fly 4 people around in a beaver, not every dude's dream, but half of the male population's dream would be to have my life. And I wanted to go back to bed. And I said, this is a problem. Consequently, the next day was my swing shift. And I went in on a swing shift, and the first patient they handed me was an EKG of a guy who was 47 having a heart attack. And I had an epiphany at that moment of what a crappy job we do for cardiovascular surveillance in this country. And I knew there had to be better strategies. I know what a failure conventional medicine is because I've been watching it for, at this point, 20 years, And I remembered thinking when I looked at the guy and went through all of his risks, he wasn't that much different than me. He's probably 20 pounds heavier than he should be. And that's about what I lost when I moved into longevity medicine and learned what I learned. I lost 20 pounds of fat. You wouldn't have called either one of us obese. We weren't terribly overweight, but we weren't, specimens either. And neither one of us had any risk factor. So I'm looking in the freaking mirror and this guy's killing heart muscle right now, and I have no idea I know I don't have a great cholesterol. So long story short, I go home that night. I gave the guy the thrombolytics. He opened his artery back up. Hopefully he didn't lose that much heart muscle. We flew him, helicoptered him to Anchorage where the cardiologists are. I'm sure he got a stent and I hope he did well. ER docs, that's about what you get, unless you happen to see him in the ER again. So I went home, I'm watching TV, and back in the old days, Synergenics, which is the platform I manage my practice underneath. It's a conglomerate of about 40 physicians now scattered around the country in various centers. They used to advertise on the TV, and there was a commercial with one of the original physicians that opened the practice. He's in his 80s now and he's retired, but his name was Jeff Life. And the old commercial was him sitting in this boat, pretty tubby. He's a nice bald-headed guy like you and I. And, he's sitting in a pair of shorts and you're like, yeah, he's a regular looking 58-year-old guy. And then they show this picture of him at 64 and he's pretty fit, and pretty muscular. And then at 68, he's still muscular and he's kind of a little trimmer even more. And then at 72, he's like this wrinkly Tarzan that's bald headed, And I'm like, what the heck does that guy know that I don't know? And I want to know that. So I made the 800 call and they pestered me until I did the training. And what happened, I did the training it was like, this is what I should have learned in medical school. A group of docs had really drilled down on a bunch of the science of longevity through nutrition, exercise, hormone replacement, which I didn't even think was a concept at that point. And, understanding supplementation and I was told in med school by some guy on the stage that, people who take supplements have expensive urine. And that guy's just wrong. And conventional medicine's starting to get behind some supplementation because eventually they figure out there's so much evidence they can't deny it anymore. But again, we're not being pushed by logic and science. We're being pushed by a pharmaceutical company narrative of what keeps the money cash flowing to those big entities that have tremendous lobbying power. So long story short, I did the training. I transformed my life in 4 months. I mean, if you happen to look at my before and after pictures, like you can look at on my website, you look at my surf pictures in 2013, I did the training in January. And so just presume that even though the surf picture was in April of 2013, I did the training in January of 2014. And then you see my surf pictures in April of 2014. And you're like, I was shocked at how fast I transformed myself with the combination of finally learning how to eat right, because doing it wrong. I was following the food pyramid. I mean, I didn't know any better. That's what they taught me,
Sure, that's what everybody thought. Yeah.
I got on hormone optimization done properly with people that knew what they were doing. And I started supplementing and I transformed my strategy of exercise a little bit. I did a lot of high intensity training, but it wasn't formal HIIT training. So I now knew how to do actual HIIT training. And the combination of those three things, the change in the stuff I was putting in the hole in my face and the advanced understanding of training and hormones optimized to the upper limit of normal of a healthy 25-year-old, which is an important point because I went down and saw some patients that I did not sell to myself. Synergenics provided me some patients while I was down there seeing some of my own patients in Las Vegas, because I also practice in Las Vegas to service the patients that I get through my interface at the fishing lodge, so they don't have to come to see me every year in Alaska. So I maintain licenses and have offices I can work out of in both locations. Well, two of these guys were on testosterone. and they both had levels of testosterone double the upper physiological limit of normal. And I look at both of their iron studies, and they're both deficient in iron and low in ferritin. And I know immediately what's going on because there's a men's health clinic around every corner in this country now. And most of them are staffed by nurse practitioners that I promise you do not understand this discipline in the fashion that I do. Okay. So what are they doing? Well, now we've got you on testosterone and you're making too many red blood cells. So you have to do phlebotomy every 3 months. So they're getting they're going to Dracula and taking nutrients and blood out of their body and throwing it in the garbage can because they can't even give the blood away because the hematocrit's too high. And they're throwing their iron away, and they've got ferritin levels that are low, which is your iron storage, and actual iron levels are low. So I see mishap constantly from poorly trained people who are just trying to get a little more business coming through the door by saying they do men's health or saying they do, female hormone replacement, and they really haven't been trained in it. So there is a cautionary tale there of try to find somebody that actually knows what they're doing. I can advocate that if you go to a Synergenics clinic anywhere in the country, you're going to find a doc that understands the science in the fashion that I do. But so yeah, that's a long introduction, but it takes that long to kind of describe my walk. That's how I ended up giving up conventional medicine, building a beautiful training facility across from a medical office that's located on my lodge property with a concept of I'm going to try to take care of people who are willing to invest in their health and help them to understand their risks in great detail, give them scientific understanding of how they can mitigate those risks with enough conviction that they'll hopefully put the lifestyle prescription into play, hormones if appropriate, done right, and understand supplementation. That's not a bunch of crazy, you have to take everything. I worry a little bit about the peptides right now. A lot of the Go Bros want peptides. A lot of people, I can buy peptides for nothing, but they're for experimental use. I can sell them, I can triple my profit because it takes a doctor to prescribe them, except how am I supposed to prescribe them? They're for experimental use in animals. It's a dog lab. I mean, there's a handful of peptides that we understand well, the GLP-1. There's tremendous human data on that. Google all these peptide stacks that these guys are wanting to put you on and say, or not Google, ask AI to show you all the human studies that demonstrate safety of utilizing these peptides. Now, let me tell you something. Peptides are the future. The guy on the bookshelf there, Near Brazalia, he's doing some tremendous scientific studies on his own, and he's going to figure out what peptides are associated with longevity. But the science is happening now. We're not in the future yet, okay? So pump the brakes on jacking yourself up with a bunch of, peptides that might also be causing increased risk of cancer. You can't always say, well, it doesn't look like it's causing cancer in rats. We're good to go. I took some BPC 157 back when it was still legal for human use because I'd ruptured my Achilles tendon. I fell in a hole, and I read enough of the rat studies, and they were actually sacrificing rat Achilles tendons. And I'm looking at the architecture of the tendons in the rats that were blinded to the treatment versus the ones that weren't. I'm like, yeah, I'm taking that. I'll take my chances. But there was a serious needs analysis there with limited downside, But I caution you not to just think that the pathway to longevity is see how many peptides you can afford. Okay. The pathway is optimized hormones, understanding the nutrition strategy properly, doing the pillars of nutrition. You can fall into many of the different dietary platforms, but there are certain pillars that should be followed. Unfortunately, exercise is the biggest biohack for longevity. And then there's other things that we can do, like we were discussing before the show, sauna, heat exposure, cold exposure. It turns out it's not great for us to sit all day long in a controlled environment. We're losing a lot of vascular reactivity from never having to thermoregulate. So what do I do? Well, I'm stuck in this office chair a lot. 4 months a year, I get exposed to the environment, which I'm grateful for. But when I'm not stuck in the office chair, or when I'm stuck in the office chair, I'll be able to go over and do a sauna and a cold plunge multiple times a week. So my body thinks it's still 10,000 BC,
No, yeah, that's all. Well, It's so much there to unpack because you're right. I think the big trouble with peptides is they do work. I mean, they've been used in Europe for decades, some newer than others, but you're right. A lot of it doesn't have the same FDA studies that you would do with other products. And I think part of it is financially related just because they're a lot harder to patent than different drugs that the FDA can approve and that big pharma can make money on. But you're right, though. Either way, it's kind of like a wild, wild west of some things can work and others have risks. And it's hard to know because it's so either hard to, the things that did work, they started, like these compounding pharmacies, they stopped allowing them to be sold. And then the other option is just kind of get it on the gray market where it's for research purposes only, and even though they know where they're being sold, but there's no regulation, there's no way to really know if you're getting a quality, clean product or garbage from China or anything else,
It's too wild for me.
Hard.
We've got a company that we use that's a very, very advanced compounding pharmacy for all of our compounded stuff called Create. And they're pretty stingy. I mean, they'll do, you can get BPC 157 oral because that's considered a supplement, and biological plausibility that it can still work because it's actually secreted in the gastric juice. So it's probably resistant to breaking down from, our enzymatic functions in our gastrointestinal tract. So you can get CJC 1295 with ipamorelin, samorelin. Obviously, insulin's a peptide widely available since the 1960s. All the GLP-1s are peptides, and I can get behind those. I use those extensively for people that need weight loss. We have tremendous human studies. There's no major safety harms. There's a few things that you need to be aware of. And, in the diabetic population, that we've got plenty of human exposure. So pretty big, not much concern about safety there. And then when you start looking at the secondary outcomes in the weight loss studies, it's like everything you'd want to see. All the biomarkers that I follow closely that predict, metabolic disease and longevity ultimately all improve. So it's like, yeah, the signal is like what we want to see. I'll be honest, when I take CJC 1295 with ipamorelin, I get stronger and I sleep better. I mean, based on somewhat objective evidence, my ring data, I get more deep sleep. I mean, which it's kind of stimulating growth hormone release, which helps you sleep, and I get stronger. I worry a little bit about, I have low IGF, so I feel a little bit less concerned about jacking up my IGF-1 levels. If I had a patient that's got IGF-1 levels of 300, I'm like, that's the picture that suggests an increased risk of cancer. You really want to take something that's jacking that up higher? I guess you ought to know about yourself at least, and then really think about, instead of just going, hey, I'm taking Joe's peptide stack, the gym bro Joe, because, man, he says it works great. And the reason that I won't use the ones that Create won't provide is because they are a high-quality compounding pharmacy that is risk adverse, okay? A giant company, FDA, clinically approved, all that stuff. And if they're not willing to subject themselves to the risk, I don't want to be sending people experimental peptides knowing they're going to take them and try to sit up in court and say, well, I thought he was going to use them on his dogs. I didn't realize that they caused cancer. And, I mean, it's like, I'm not sacrificing my well-being and integrity over that kind of stuff. Just being honest,
No, good points. Well, on that note, like a lot of things in life, there's the 80-20, and I've had a similar, just totally changed my life as far as going through a good functional medicine program back in 2023 that had an unbelievable difference on my health, my losing fat, gaining muscle, just feeling better, my gut health. And a big part of that was testing, because I think that's a part of, a lot of people just hear something online and they start doing something. It may be good for one person, but not for another person. And if you don't know your blood work, you're just going blind, So can you talk on that, as far as the importance of testing? And then also, what is like the 80-20 if, like, before you do anything, fancy and biohacking, what are like the basics you should be doing first?
Yeah. So I think, there's so much testing that's now available at an affordable rate for cash practice. Most of my patients, I know their coronary anatomy in detail. Okay. At the end of the day, but my initial story was, here's a dude who's 47. Do I have the process? The answer is very little at 62, because I know. I can pull up an AI model of my heart and spin it around and look at my arteries with precision, a test called Clearly Analysis. $1,570 to just know right now, okay? I mean, that's chump change for most of us, okay? I mean, why not understand your coronary anatomy? Now, all those biomarkers that conventional medicine is causing to trigger you to be on a statin, I really don't care if your total cholesterol is 250, if you're 62 years old and you have virtually no coronary artery disease. What the hell am I treating? The lipids are one part of the equation. But at the end of the day, there are three main drivers of cardiovascular disease that we can measure in the liquid biopsy called our plasma, okay? It's the lipid particles themselves, and there is a lot of nuance to that. Most people have never had anything but a basic concentration-based cholesterol panel. That means how much LDL, how much is the total cholesterol, how much HDL, which we generally think of as protective, how much LDL, we generally think of those as the particles that are wedging between the endothelial lining and getting behind that lining between that and the muscular wall of the artery, eventually causing the channel that feeds the blood to whatever's downstream to get narrower and narrower until it either closes off so much you become symptomatic or one of those plaques gets rotten, ruptures, and if a clot forms that's big enough to bridge the entire artery, then whatever's downstream dies. Heart attack, stroke. Those are the biggies, right? That's going to get over a third of us statistically in the industrialized world because we ain't dying of colic, okay? So we mostly die of heart attack and stroke. So the lipid panels themselves, but everybody should have a fractionated panel at least once. Your liver packages these particles in different sizes. And small is bad. I have small packaging, okay? So the reason small is bad is because it takes more particles to create the same concentration, right? Okay, I mean, so you're looking at a concentration-based cholesterol panel, your LDL's 140, that's above primary prevention standard of 100, here's your stat. Oh, it turns out you got really big LDL. There's not that many particles in there, okay? There's a lot less than somebody with me who I have small LDL. And guess what penetrates the endothelial lining more easily? Big and fluffy or tiny and small? The little ones can wedge through easier. So in addition to having more particles, they're more atherogenic, meaning they're more likely to cause the blood vessel disease. There's some protein markers that we follow. Apolipoprotein B is finally being picked up by conventional medicine. That's almost becoming a standard with the lipid panel. And that does infer the particles because it actually tells you a particle count because there's one ApoB protein for every type of particle that tends to cause atherosclerosis. So your triglyceride packages, your LDLs, your VLDLs, your IDLs have an ApoB protein. Turns out HDL has an big A protein, not to be confused with another very important biomarker that conventional medicine's starting to focus on, but because there's not a pharmaceutical agent to affect this biomarker, it's called LP little a, lipoprotein little a, and this is a protein that exists on the ApoB protein that somehow makes those particles more atherogenic, more likely to cause disease. We don't really understand mechanistically. It's an association. It affects about 20% of the population. To me, that is an indicator that I have to be more actionable in those areas where we can focus on reducing risk. So that's something that, hey, your LP little a is 200. We got to get that LDL down. I mean, this is a 2x multiplier, right? So that's the particles. Kind of covered that. What's the other biggest driver? There's two other big drivers of disease, and they are also significant drivers of blood vessel disease, and they're kind of linked together. One is insulin sensitivity and glycation, the concept of are you running higher sugars? The higher your sugar, the more you're attaching sugar to everything. And the other is inflammation. And it turns out that inflammation and insulin sensitivity are tied together. The inflammatory state creates insulin insensitivity, and insulin insensitivity creates the inflammatory state. And we know that excess weight, particularly visceral fat, which like my DEXA scan that I do annually on all my patients measures their visceral fat, is associated with systemic inflammation. and it's associated with insulin insensitivity. So we're looking at tracking visceral fat, and I'm using that as a biomarker and saying, this is a problem in you. And like, especially the guy who's got the elevated LP little a, it's like, we got to get this down. We need you to lose fat. So how do we measure? Well, glycation is basically demonstrated by the test called hemoglobin A1C. Now, a lot of people never get that test done. Their annual panel is a chemistry panel, and they go, your fasting blood sugar in the morning's still normal, and normal's 104 or less, which ain't optimal, okay?
Crazy, yeah.
I just got my blood drawn this morning. I'm hoping to be in the 70s as usual. We'll see, right? But, and then hemoglobin A1C is measuring how much sugar is attached to the hemoglobin molecule on your red blood cells. And what that allows scientists to do, they were able to create an equation that said if there's this much sugar on your red blood cells, because we know red blood cells have a lifespan of 90 to 120 days, we can extrapolate what your average blood sugar has been over the last 90 to 120 days. And they've set the mark of 5.7 as prediabetes, and greater than 6.5 is diabetes. So that's how we define diabetes. When you go into your doctor, it's like, well, we did your hemoglobin A1C and you've got mild diabetes, your A1C is 6.7. You've now gotten that moniker for the rest of your life. And it's interesting because I've been reversing type 2 diabetes extreme cases to where people are on no medicine for 12 years. And I just saw recent Medscape articles that I'm looking at in my little window that I still have to download and decide if I want to save the study, are coming out going, is type 2 diabetes reversible? I mean, that's how far behind conventional medicine is behind, science and logic. It takes forever for the big, giant, low lumbering mass of conventional medicine, which is made up of committees that all have to agree to make something a standard of care or an FDA indication. So if you want to be 10 to 12 to 15 years behind on the newest things, the most science, the same thing, they're starting to look at CT coronary angiogram. One of the studies I just downloaded was a cardiologist saying in 5 to 10 years, this will be standard of care. Like it's been a standard of care for me for 5 years already. Okay. So again, I'm at least 10 years ahead if that guy's right. Okay. Maybe 15 if his guess is wrong. So anyways, that's glycation. Glycation, how much sugar's on your red cells. Sugar's gumming up the works. Sugar attaches to your lipid particles and makes them stickier. Let's just use that as a reasonable way to look at it. Okay. It slows down your enzyme systems so your cells don't work as well. You get sugar high enough, those people get infections all the time. Why? Well, because bacteria like sugar. It's a food source for them, and their white blood cells don't work as well because all the enzyme systems intracellularly are being clogged with sugar. So that's a very important biomarker. And you know what? Some people that are our age have never had a hemoglobin A1C. They probably get their blood work once in a while. Your blood sugar's normal. Insulin sensitivity, which is generally going to occur before the A1C starts to climb unless you're pillaging yourself with carbohydrates, okay? I mean, if you want a high A1C, make sure you start eating sugar when you get up and eat some right before you go to bed, because now you're increasing your exposure window. So even if you have good insulin sensitivity, you're always having sugar around and it's glycating, okay? Insulin sensitivity is something that you see in people who have muscles and use them. And I got a great story about my son, which maybe we'll get to. We'll see. I want to certainly serve all your questions first. But insulin sensitivity, we look at fasting blood sugar and fasting insulin levels, okay? And we look for, by the way, our goal for A1C is 5.1 or less. And I generally maintain mine below that, even though my dad and his dad both were type 2 diabetics that ended up on insulin. They also were fat and lazy.
Just on that note, because I agree 100%, and that is such a common problem, especially in the U.S., is high blood sugar. What would be some common recommendations you'd make to help people get, reduce their insulin resistance? And I would love to hear that story of your son.
Okay. And then just remind me, we're going to go to inflammatory markers after that. So we calculate your fasting insulin or your insulin sensitivity a couple of ways. You can look at your triglyceride to HDL ratio. If that's greater than 3, you're insulin resistant. assuming you fasted. Okay, you got to do the test right. If you look at your fasting insulin levels and your fasting sugar, you can plug those into a computer or a calculator called the HOMA-IR, homeostatic model of insulin resistance. And if it's over 2, you're insulin resistant. Ideally, I want my patients below 1. I'm usually 0.36, which is, they won't let me calculate any lower because it won't let you put in a fasting insulin level less than 2.9. And I frequently have fasting insulin levels less than undetectable, less than 2. Okay. Insulin's a polypeptide hormone. And if you're not needing a lot of it to control your blood sugar, okay, if you're sensitive to it and you stop eating at 8 o'clock at night and you get your blood drawn at 8 in the morning, you shouldn't have much insulin hanging around. If there's a lot of insulin hanging around, it's because you had to use a lot of insulin to deal with that last meal, right? So here's my son's darkest place I've been in a long time, January 5. Everybody's got the flu. My patients are going, what do I take for this? I'm like, chicken soup. No, I mean, it's like, well, I'm not going to tell them to run and go get on a bunch of antiviral, useless. Right. That's pharmaceutical wallet biopsy. I get a history, make sure they don't feel like they're dying. Doesn't sound like they got pneumonia, and then, usually I try to nurse them out of trying to think they don't need antibiotics. I don't want to be killing their microbiome because they got the flu. So I'm hearing like everybody's got the flu. My kid gets the flu. He's got the classic stuff. I'm walking up the stairs. My legs ache, Dad, he's puking a little bit. Anyways, I didn't play the greatest ER doctor on this one, Thankfully, my partners that I had to drag him in. So basically about 4 days later, I take him into the ER because I'm like, he's worse flu. And I actually had known the diagnosis. I took him in because I went and bought a finger stick thing. I started thinking he was going into, I thought, man, I think maybe he's diabetic because he was losing weight. He was drinking a ton of fluids. And I thought, well, maybe it's because he's vomiting a lot. I controlled his vomiting. Zofran, pricked his sugar, 390. All right, wow. Here's how bad conventional medicine. Now, my partner, Mike Blake, saved his life. He was working the swing shift. They couldn't ship him. We don't do pediatric intensive care here. So he was stuck in the ER. Mike Blake stayed the night and rallied my kid out of DKA. He was in moderate DKA. His pH was 7.19. Way to go, genius ER doctor. Drag your kid in damn near dead. Okay. He rallied 2 nights in the ER because the weather sucked, thank God, because I really didn't want to go to Anchorage. I knew we were going to get him out of it, and he was out of DKA. And then I get the conventional approach to medicine. So the little nutrition gal comes in and teaches us about diabetes. And, it's unheard of to go home after DKA in 2 days. Suzanne's, my wife, is medical. I'm a physician. We were a unique case. So we actually went home after a 2-day hospitalization because we didn't need as much education. But I didn't know how to dose insulin anymore. And I mean, they're telling me what his basal insulin needs are, and it's a lot. And so I'm getting long-acting insulin. I'm getting the short pens. They're teaching us how to dose insulin based on what he eats. So they're teaching us, here's how you calculate the insulin needs. They don't think they're wrong, by the way, but they don't think that net carbs is a thing. It didn't take me long to figure out that at least in Brett and in following myself with CGM, in me, nuts and seeds don't do jack, okay? Mm-hmm. So pretty soon it was like, you don't have to tell us if you want to eat nuts and seeds, son. Have at them, okay? It's not affecting your sugar. But they don't think, they calculate everything. And the exact words that the dietitian, this hospital, dietitian, who's trained, it's not the hospital's fault. This is how they're training these people, was, now he's a kid, Bob. He can still have a Coke now and then, but Coke has 35 grams of sugar. So you would give him 3.5 units of short acting to account for that. I'm like, you're out of your freaking mind. It's like, I got to convince my kid that he needs to have a life like me, insulin sensitive. Okay. And so we get out of the hospital. He's laying on the couch. I teach him the stuff I'm teaching you. He's smart. He's 15, but he's science, math brain, good. I teach him about how diabetes drives vascular disease, the most common cause of death. And he looks at me from that couch and his little shrunken up, 115 pound. He's got me by 5 pounds now at 15. He's 160 today. But he looks at me and says, so what you're telling me, Dad, is I just can't eat like other kids anymore. And I'm like, not if you want to be healthy at my age, let alone alive. And he was like, okay. And that is literally who he is. I've never seen I praise God that he gave me this kid that is so willing to just eat how he should eat for his diagnosis. So what happened? By April, no insulin. Now, I understand why. And it's gonna answer your question because you asked me what's the best thing to do to maintain insulin sensitivity. But here's how I arrived at the hypothesis. I'm sitting in that room trying to learn everything I can about new onset type 1 diabetes in the dark with a pit in my stomach, thinking about the arguments my son and I are going to have about what he can eat. The fact that that didn't become a thing was just the blessing. And I'm reading on a site called Up to Date, which is something that we generally have access to. It's advanced medical for doctors. And I'm reading about remission, which I didn't know was a thing, and the honeymoon phase, which I don't remember getting taught in medical school. Now, the people in the medical 2.0 process told me about the honeymoon phase. They said his needs will probably go down for a while for insulin after this acute event, but then they'll start to go to where he's going to probably be. And I'm like, okay. So that's the honeymoon phase. So something about initial type 1 diabetes onset, it doesn't completely get your pancreas. The only way you have less insulin needs for your given diet is if you're still making some. But they finish the job because they tell you it's okay to drink a Coke, okay? Crazy. So look, if you just were in a train wreck and you got 17 broken bones, they don't go over there and go, come on, get up. No, you got to heal. Yeah, my hypothesis was rest his pancreas because it's damaged. How do you do that? Not by letting him eat what he wants and try to time the short-acting insulin, make it where he doesn't need short-acting insulin.
Right.
So we went to a very ketogenic diet initially with we got all the RFK molecules, I call them, out of his diet, okay? I mean, like no more anything that has a word that's not food in it. So he's eating a completely whole food diet or processed foods that are so clean, they meet the Bobby approved app, just getting nothing. Because some of those things trigger autoimmune disease, and he's got an autoimmune disease. His body's attacking his pancreas. And so anyways, we're slowly watching his needs come down, and pretty soon it's like we're giving him 1 unit of long acting, and we still get woke up at night because his sugar's dripping down below 80, and that's an alarm that makes me or Suzanne to go make sure he didn't roll over. Make sure he just rolled over on his thing, and he's not going to get Dane bramage from too low a sugar.
Yeah.
And pretty soon I'm like, we just need to stop the insulin. I mean, and now our lives are no longer pillaged. So since April, he's had no insulin. Now, his sensor died last night, and I bet she hasn't put a new one on him yet, but we still monitor him continuously. But I can show you, like, I think I took a picture of his last nighttime blood sugar. Here's my type 1 diabetic son, nighttime blood sugar on no insulin. Now, here's the really interesting point. If you want to learn just how bad conventional medicine is, I took him down to, I'm going to just say, a tertiary referral center, so I don't pick on any one person, okay, or any one in place. But this was a pediatric endocrinology clinic. And to be honest, I don't think the pediatric endocrinologist understands metabolic health as well as I do. They were capable of confirming that he has type 1 diabetes. They sent off 5 antibody tests that I had no idea what to send. And they said, yeah, he's got antibodies to 3 of the 5 tests. So he's got type 1 diabetes. And I'm like, okay. He also has a mid-range normal C peptide, which means he's making insulin. So his pancreas ain't dead yet. Okay.
Good.
My hypothesis that I formed that night came from this information. In reading about the people who go into remission, which the pediatric endocrinologist said, well, we don't think remission occurs. He will progress. I'm like, all right, well, Up to Date says that 3% of first-time new onset diabetic go into remission. They say they don't end up progressing to have type 1 diabetes, but that's fine. You disagree with Up to Date. But it's interesting. I said they say the subgroup most likely to go into remission is teenage boys, and least likely is infants. So that means the teenage boys are maybe a higher percent. So maybe I just got lucky, right? It's just random. It's a lottery. Spin the wheel. I didn't get lucky. My hypothesis is going to eventually be proven right. But why would teenage boys of all subgroups be the most likely to go into remission? And I'm going to answer your question right now. What's the best thing to do for insulin sensitivity? Maintain lean muscle mass, okay? You got to be lean because you're not insulin sensitive if you're not lean. And you got to be muscular because muscles can use sugar without insulin. When you are physically active and ATP is being generated in the muscle, it activates an enzyme called AMPK, which creates a glucose transport channel in the muscle wall that just starts sucking sugar out of your body without insulin, okay? Which subgroup do you think is the most muscular and the most active?
Teenage boys.
Boys. Which is the least muscular and the least active? Infants. Lowest remission rate. So my hypothesis was formed, and Brett, who's 15 and is about my size, he's going to probably hopefully he'll get me by an inch or two. I'm 5'7". The other day in his weight training class, he told me, and it's like freshmen, juniors, sophomores, seniors. They were doing the lead sled. He pushed more weight than anybody. And he's a little guy.
That's awesome.
But he's all in. I think being in DKA, he maybe thought he was going to die, you know? I mean, I don't know. He never voiced that to me. But somehow the combination of all these factors made him the most compliant patient I have, okay? He just does what I say. So we work out a lot. He's in multiple sports because teenage boys, their testosterone's activated. Testosterone creates insulin sensitivity. Testosterone helps build muscle, and they're in sports and they're active. So if the conventional approach to nutrition in type 1 diabetes is don't teach them how to eat a insulin requiring diet, it's just teach them how to dose insulin for whatever their diet is. And that's across the board. The subgroup who rests their pancreas the most relative to that standardized American diet is teenage boys because they're making muscle and they're using muscle. So there's your answer. And I know I'm so long-winded, but that's just me.
No, that's good. That's good. Well, and I know you want to hit on inflammatory, that third pillar as well.
Yeah. So we look at inflammation as it drives cardiovascular disease, but it drives all disease. It drives osteoporosis. It drives dementia. It drives
Cancers, right?
Cancer. Absolutely. But from the vascular standpoint, since, at the end of the day, I'm really trying to stop my patients from dying from the most common cause of death at first, is look at inflammation like if your vessels are inflamed, which is measurable by several different testing strategies. The two most prominent ones are homocysteine levels and high sensitivity CRP. And I follow those every time I check my labs and in all my patients at whatever lab frequency we decide upon, based on their needs analysis. That inflammation of the vessel wall causes that endothelial lining to be inflamed, which actually causes separation of the tight junctions between the cells in that lining that lets the cholesterol slip in. Okay. That's a very basic way to understand why inflammation is bad. Okay. So how do you reduce inflammation? Well, a lot of inflammation is in the diet. So when I eat, I take a triglyceride form of fish oil, molecularly distilled with each meal, because many of the foods we eat are inflammatory, and that doesn't make them all bad. I mean, you have to have omega-6 in your diet or you die. But the standard American diet, which is based on a lot of grain, which is mostly omega-6, is very high in omega-6. And so I do follow my omega-3 levels, and I'm about 1-to-1. The average American's about 5-to-1. They're about 20% omega-3s to 80% omega-6s. The last time I checked, I was 57% omega in my cell walls. Those omega-3 fats in the cell walls are used by your white blood cells when they go to an area of injury. The omega-6 fats create inflammatory compounds. The omega-3 fats create anti-inflammatory compounds. All right. So if you're shifted to the left, eating a ton of grain, never eat fish, don't eat very many green leafy vegetables, which has the plant version of omega-3, ALA. This is DHA and EPA. You want all three. You're going to be shifted into the inflammatory response. Everything that happens to you is going to hurt worse. Here's an interesting example. I did a thing, advanced testing's available, right? So I did this pre-novo scan, right? $2,500. They scan you looking for tumors, and they'll detect anything up to 1 centimeter. And it was negative. And we offer it at 10% discount to our patients. So I go get it done, and I don't have any tumors. Great. I have moderately severe central canal lumbar spine stenosis from L1 through L4 and neuroforaminal stenosis at every level. Now, I will disclose that when I went to Costa Rica last year and occasionally on days when I flew like 5 or 6 days in a row where I sat so much, I get a little ass cheek discomfort. But I mean, I don't have back pain. You guys, if you watch the video, you'll see there's one day where I go pack a moose ham because my buddy shot one day, his buddy shot one the next day. I had him on a swamp about 7 miles from the lodge. So I'm flying in my Super Cub, getting in and out of a Super Cub, which is a back exercise all by itself, right? 30 times in one day, packed one of the hams, and then loaded all those quarters and hams and neck meat and antlers. Well, the antlers I got a couple days later into the back of my Cub. And then when I beached it at the lake, I got out on my float, put it on my shoulder, climbed, jumped off the float, walked up the hill, threw it into the 6-wheeler so the kids could hang it in the walk-in refrigerator. Didn't have back pain that day, didn't have it the next day on my Ultimate, Why? Why do I have the phenotype? I mean, why do I have the structural pathology to cause pain that looks like an MRI in the guys that were trying to beat me out of Dilaudid or morphine in the ER for a 25-year career, and I'm not experiencing discomfort? Because my inflammatory health is remarkably good because I do the things that I know. These are simple things and true things, so you know how to do things. I try to stay out of the controversy, okay? That's why I'm not, I get peptide calls all the time. That's why I can't do it. I mean, I gotta know, or at least have enough conviction that I'm really feeling it's safe. So inflammation is a big driver of, are you hurting? Do your joints ache? Do you wake up stiff? Probably because you're not properly balanced with regards to inflammation. So the two key areas of inflammation, one is nutrition, the hole in your face. Combat it with high quality fish oil. Make sure you get your chia seeds, great ALA source, green leafy vegetables, flaxseed, all those things are good. Try to cut back on the omega-6 stuff, less grain. I take legumes over grains because they got double the protein, double the fiber, and probably have similar omega-6, but at least you're getting more protein, more fiber, and it's not nearly as much sugar to your system as grain, okay? The other main source is that visceral fat. Who was dying in COVID? People with visceral fat.
Overweight people, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and they were actually demonstrating that in the lungs at autopsy, they could trace the fat that was making up the pulmonary process, the disease that was causing the lungs to fail, was actually the visceral fat. They were tracing it to that. So, you want to be lean in that abdomen, okay? And unfortunately, there's some people that store there. I just recently saw a very fine man who's a type 2 diabetic since age 24. I think it was pretty hard baked into his genes. Now, I offered some quality, lifestyle recommendations, and I'm pretty sure he's going to do them because I can tell he's adopting just from the quick interaction already, right? But I mean, he's just one of these guys. He doesn't have very much body fat. He was only 24%. My usual goal for a male is 20, but I made his 15 because it's all inside his belly.
Yeah,
I mean, the 4% that he's over is in his gut. So he's just one of these genetic predisposed type 2 diabetes, that kind of small, lower body, that kind of big belly, skinny fat, we call it, right? And so, but he's got all the same strategies as the rest of us. I said, I want more resistance training. I need muscle out of you, optimize his testosterone so he can build muscle, and then make him understand simple things that are, this continuous glucose monitoring is readily available to you guys now. You can go to Stelo.com, Stelo.com, or you can go to Hello Lingo. So the word hello and then Lingo.com, and get the Dexcom or the Abbott, non-prescription. If you buy it on Amazon, you get like 2 of them, which lasts you a month for $99. Watch what your food does to your sugar with a phone app. So you're getting the same real-time data that my son's getting, and watch what movement does. Because this, it changed my strategy for eating and movement considerably, okay? When I realized that my Prote meal, which I love, made my sugar go to 189 when I just sat at my desk that day, I'm like, whoa, probably shouldn't be eating Prote meal. Now, so what's my standard office-based breakfast? sauteed vegetables in avocado oil, whole eggs scrambled in because I have a defect in choline metabolism and I need the choline in those yolks. And I think
Sure.
it's more important than worrying about the cholesterol in them. And half an avocado over that with some salt. I can sit at my desk. My sugar won't break 120. I could not move at all. There's just no carbs in that. The carbs that are in the vegetables takes forever to get them out of the veg. Okay. The prot meal day, I did it again. So I was on I'd eat prot meal one day, Greek yogurt with kefir.
Are you talking like oatmeal with protein in it? Is that the prot meal?
Yeah. My prot meal is steel cut oats. So the least refined, slowest absorbing of the carbs with a scoop of chia seeds for extra fiber and extra protein, a scoop of I use Ancient Nutrition. They make a nice plant-based protein that doesn't have any bad molecules in it. It's full of all kinds of adaptogens and stuff. Put a scoop of that in there to get my meal to 40 grams because I got to eat 40 grams 3 times a day. And then I snack on nuts and seeds, which probably pushes me to that, gram per pound. I get around 130, 150 grams of protein. I weigh 150. So anyways, I sort of figured out what these were doing to my sugar. And I said, well, the yogurt's intermediate. The oatmeal's really high. The eggs are if I'm augured into a chair and I'm going to have a hard way to fight my way out of it. So prot meal is the day when I know I'm packing a moose and I'm going to be grunting it all day long, right? And now I just don't eat the prot meal as frequently. And by the way, oats are really the only grain I eat. And I have done food allergy sensitivity. I think I got a pretty healthy gut. I light up on almost nothing. Gluten, I had a 2 and I barely ever touch wheat, and that's because it's so antigenic. But there's not much protein getting through my intestinal lining intact to where my body can attack it on anything. But I was a 0 for oats. And I thought, there's so much data that suggests that oats are helpful, colon cancer, things like that. It's like, and if you go to the Mediterranean diet, there's a lot of grain in the Mediterranean diet and it wins on all the dietary platforms. And I always tell people, well, keep in mind, it's winning because it's beating the standard American diet and you can't hardly find anything that's not going to win in that. But it's winning against the other diets, despite the fact that it has too much grain in it, because A, they are mostly whole grains. So you're not getting that refined sugar hit as much. And B, there's tons of vegetables. There's fish. They don't eat a ton of processed meat. They eat fruits and they eat lots of nuts and seeds and avocados. And unfortunately, we could get into this controversy. It's a deep one. And then red wine. And they've done some meta-analysis and the red wine seems to be a significant factor. Yet most, even longevity docs are starting to say, you probably shouldn't drink alcohol at all. I don't think it's the hill you're going to die on. I think red wine's the best choice because there's actual nutritive value in it. And I think it's best, I basically advocate 1 glass red with dinner. You're not going to absorb the alcohol very fast. So the alcohol is not going to create a significant, toxin hit. And you're going to get some of the nutrients. And look, at the end of the day, we all can't be Brian Johnson. I wish I was him, but I wouldn't mind his money. I don't know that I want to live that rigid,
Pick your battle. Yeah.
So, but anyways, so that's inflammation. So get lean, support your inflammatory health with making sure your nutrition strategy favors omega-3 from supplementation to the foods you eat, wild fish, grass-fed meats. I will advocate against, I'll eat grass-fed beef. I'll eat high-quality sourced pork. I'll eat chicken that is free-range, antibiotic-free. I'm not afraid of conventionally raised meats, but I try to get the higher quality ones. I will advocate against processed meats unless there's no nitrite.
That's good.
There's clear signal that that's harmful in the nutritional literature. Most of the red meat harm is coming from poorly designed studies that don't control for protein quality. Okay. So, if you want your grass-fed steak once or twice a week, because that really makes your life better, you're not going to die on that hill. If you're going and getting a ribeye 3 nights a week from some corn-fed, a cow that basically was put in a stall and fed corn until it became a diabetic, that fat is full of inflammation.
On that note, you talk about moose. I need to, afterward chat with you about how I buy some moose from you there in Alaska. I would love some moose in the freezer.
Yeah, well, you can't legally sell it.
Okay.
We get a lot of it. And, generally, like my good clients that come to the lodge, I usually throw a moose roast or two in their fish box on the way out. We serve it every week at our weekly cookout,
That's awesome.
And we got 2 nice ones this last year. So we're sitting really good on moose. My wife and I shot some black-tailed deer, and that's amazing stuff.
That's cool.
They just eat nothing but grass out there on Kodiak. And so their fat was the best tasting wild fat I've ever had in my life. I mean,
That's
I left
awesome.
the fat on the ham, and like the steaks have the fat in them still,
Yeah, it's just so lean and healthy. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Hey, one other thing you mentioned too with supplementation, and I know supplementation's a loaded question because it really probably depends on what they need, and the only way you really know that is blood testing and other testing. But in general, if you were to say for most people, these whatever top 5, top 10 supplements, what do you think are some low-hanging fruit for supplementation?
Yeah, so I eventually want to create a webinar on this. The top 3 are easy. I don't have to see you. Take a high-quality probiotic. I take one that's individually blister sealed in nitrogen. It's made up of 4 different organisms, lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. They've been shown to be organisms associated with a healthy microbiome. They'll help out compete the bad bugs. You can transform your microbiome in about 3 weeks with a high-quality probiotic. That's not the end game. I mean, I eat fermented foods, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha. I do those things with regularity as part of my nutritional strategy. So you want the prebiotics as well. Take vitamin D3 with K2, 5,000 international units and 45 to 90 micrograms. Nobody's going to get toxic at that. And most people that aren't taking that, I tell people, look, if you're a roofer in Texas or you're a surfer in Hawaii, you could probably do without. Maybe check your levels first. The rest of us, I got the studio light on me here. I don't think it's helping any. I'm in Alaska. It's a no-brainer. My vitamin D levels were 18. Thank you, lecturer, who told me I would have expensive urine, And by the way, low vitamin D was a huge risk factor for COVID death.
Wow.
Okay. I mean, I got those studies loaded in my COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And there are still people vigilante against vitamin D supplementation in the Medicine 2.0 talking point. I'm like, it's $5 a month, guys.
Yeah.
Just
so
get
crazy.
your levels 50 to 80. Now, I find about 10% of my population will need 10,000 units of vitamin D to get into that range. They don't absorb well. The third one that I think is in the no-brainer category is fish oil, right? I mean, that became kind of obvious. A molecularly distilled triglyceride formula is probably the best way to go. You get more of the omega-3s without additional fats. It's absorbed better. Eat it with food because fats are absorbed better with food. 1-3 times a day. Caveat, if you've ever had atrial fibrillation, you probably have some structural heart problems, and high-dose fish oil has been shown to slightly increase risk of recurrence. I only put those people on one. So those are the 3 easy ones. The next one that I think is kind of a no-brainer, I've been taking it for 12 years, is berberine. Well, berberine is very interesting. I have some really good studies on berberine that are of the highest quality data that you can get in science, double-blind clinical controlled trial. I have one where they basically prescribe berberine at 500 milligrams a day to a treatment group, and then they had the control group. Of course, they try to match them and all of that. And what they showed was that there was a statistically significant reduction in hemoglobin A1C, fat and fasting blood sugar, LDL, triglycerides, and if you look at meta-analysis, and in the study, there was weight loss in the berberine group, but it didn't meet statistical significance. But when they meta-analyzed the berberine studies, weight loss meets statistical significance. So if you power it big enough, it actually helps you lose weight. So look, we all want lower LDL, less particles. We all want lower average blood sugar and fasting blood sugar, right? Because of glycation. I think there may be some data on inflammatory markers, high sensitivity CRP, but I'm not sure if I have a study on that. But anyways, this double-blind study basically says, well, good God, it's the longevity supplement. I take a formulation that we have called Glucomax Protect. It's a 500 of berberine, and it also has alpha lipoic acid, which also has some sugar benefits. I generally assign that to people that I see evidence their A1C is high, or maybe their fasting insulin levels are high. I'll usually try to get them on that. I think anybody that's not price sensitive, it's probably reasonable. Like, even if you're in lower's better, LDL lower, probably better. A1C lower, probably better. Triglycerides lower, probably better. Why not take it? It's, I tell people, look, supplements aren't going to make the biggest difference in your life, but they're the easiest thing to do. All you got to do is buy them and take. They're not that much work, The next one that I put into the no-brainer nearly is highly bioavailable curcumin. Okay, now the one we have is called Curcumax Plus. I have a double-blind study that shows that the control group versus the treatment group, they did brain MRI with a special contrast that made amyloid show up. Now, amyloid is the protein that replaces your brain tissue when you have Alzheimer's dementia, okay? We're not saying it's causative, it's associated, but clearly when you have Alzheimer's dementia, amyloid scores are higher. So they took 50 to 80-year-old people that were mildly cognitively impaired, and they separated them into 2 equal groups. And then they randomized one group to get the highly bioavailable curcumin twice daily, and the other group to get the placebo. They also tested those people before the study for CNS vital signs, something I do every year at my annual that looks at things like executive function, complex attention, verbal memory, both immediate and remote, visual memory, immediate and remote, reaction time, simple attention. It looks at a bunch of things. What they determined in the study after 18 months of one group getting it and the other not, the group getting it, no change in amyloid in their brains. The control group, statistically significant increase. The group getting it, preserved global memory and preserved attention span. The group not getting it, statistically significant decline in both of those categories. And I have the ApoE4, 1 copy. Now that's a protein that's on the cholesterol molecules. Another one we haven't talked about. There's 3 different alleles. There's 2, which is like you got the lottery. Okay. There's 3, which is the wild type. About 75% of people are 3/3. I was 3/4. My sister is a 3/2. She's got carotids that look like babies. I mean, her HDL's like 100, She has no vascular disease at all, I mean, so because that ApoE4 gene is 1 copy is supposed to increase your risk of Alzheimer's 2.5 to 4 times the general the wild type, and 2 copies is 12 to 16 times greater. That was what kind of got Chris Hemsworth on that pathway to longevity, because his grandma had severe dementia and he found out he was a 4/4. So that kind of got him focused on, I better figure out what I'm doing. I think he was already doing a lot of good stuff just looking at his physique in the movies, but he's probably nuanced it into more things. So for me, I read that study knowing I was 3/4. It's like I'm on that the rest of my life. But it has tremendous anti-inflammatory effects. There are a lot of studies that show a reduction in joint pain. So maybe that's why my bad back doesn't bother me. I think it's everything. I think it's the fish oil. I think it's avoiding inflammatory foods. I think it's maintaining ideal body weight. I know that I do a lot of core work, and stabilizing your core is helping me not to have the pain that pathology normally causes. And it's probably also that I take Curcumax because it's very anti-inflammatory. The next thing that if I was going to throw in there, if you said, I want one more out of you, I'd say, a high quality B vitamin supplement. I take those because I know from my personal needs analysis that when I got off grain, which is folate fortified, my homocysteine started climbing. And it got not technically abnormal, but higher than optimal. And so I went on a compound methylation formula, all the B vitamins in a methylated form. And my homocysteines now are 7 to 8, with our goal being less than 9. And they used to run 11, 12. They started out at 9, but I was eating grain like a mad dog. because I thought I
Right.
couldn't have fat and whole grains, right? I mean, Jesus, it's the bottom of the food pyramid. And nobody's going to screw that one up. So
That's
I
awesome.
think those are kind of like the real no-brainers. I mean, magnesium, you should probably take 500 of magnesium at night, some magnesium
Mhm.
glycinate,
Mhm.
that helps with sleep, relaxes your muscles. It's dirt cheap. If you're young, but maybe not real young and you're not on hormone replacement, you might consider, let me just check something here. You might consider, DHEA if your levels are low, because your body can turn that into all your hormones. So you might increase your testosterone production endogenously. I put a
Mm.
lot of people on that. Young people, they're losing weight. Like I get people in my clinic that come because they want to lose weight and they want somebody to manage their GLP-1s with some precision. So I DEXA them and then I make them DEXA again so that I can chirp at them when they're losing muscle. And like I told you, you got to eat protein first and you have to lift, or you're going
Mhm.
to lose a third of this weight from your muscles, which is still going to benefit you because of how much fat you lose, but it's not as optimal as if you don't lose.
Yeah, no, really good point. No, man, this has been awesome, Bob. And I know we're coming up on actually past the hour, but I appreciate you. You've been like dropping gold. So this is fantastic. I did want to say, before we wrap up, any final thoughts on, recommendations for people's health and to be optimal? And then also, how can people reach you if they would like to go do an amazing Alaska fishing trip, and also to work with you as a longevity specialist to get their health and
My
hormones
phone
optimized?
number, if you post my website, which kind of goes over my whole process and all the testing that we do and all of that, it's got my cell phone number. That's the only number I use. I don't have an assistant that's answering it for me. So you'll get me eventually.
Awesome.
And if you go to the website, we can post and actually I can send you my digital business card that has the right side is my health practice, the left side is the lodge. Obviously, I'd love for people to watch Dr. Bob's Wild Diaries on the Outdoor Channel on
Yes.
February 20th. I'll
Yes.
try to drop you something so you can put that into your however you do this on the podcast introduction. But yeah, I'm more than happy to speak with somebody. I can be engaged for longevity medicine by a meeting in the winter months in Nevada in Las Vegas. I can be engaged here in Alaska if they want to come to the lodge. I can make sure I'm not flying one day and do their assessment. Happy to do that and would love to, and put together a package for fun around the one day of deep insight into medical history and medical challenges and stuff. And, in the summary, the lifestyle prescription's the key. Exercise is the biggest biohack that there is. Look, man, your cells are operating on the molecules you're putting into your digestive tract. And there is no hedge around that. You put molecules that are not supposed to be in your cells, that don't fit the ancestral blueprint, your cells don't work good. You don't have to be perfect, okay? My grandkids having a birthday party, I'm eating a cupcake, right? That you're not going to die on that hill. That can't be your nutrition strategy. I think it's very important to understand that the movement and the food need to be understood in how they interact. You will learn that with movement. I think I kind of missed going off in that direction, but when I eat meal, if I wanted to, I would just okay, I'm going to do phone work this morning, pop my ear pods in, and I would literally eat slowly and walk around the house. I probably can keep it under 130,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
not letting it spike. We all want to use as little insulin as possible, whether it's somebody having to inject it or somebody's pancreas making it. So learn to pair your higher carbohydrate intake with movement, avoid carbs early in the day and late in the day to decrease that exposure window and lower that A1C, figure out what your cardiac risks are, find a doctor. There's Synergenics, centers around the country. I'm happy to help you get into one if you want to contact me first. But if you like the idea of Vegas, I cotton to Vegas. It's white and cold out here and the days are short. So I don't mind getting down there. If I have to do another week or two in Vegas because of increased volume down there, I'm more than happy to do it. And like I said, I feel free to reach out. But those are, hormones. when you need them, you need them. They
Mm-hmm.
look,
Mm-hmm.
hormones go inside your cells
Mm-hmm.
and tell them how to work.
Yeah.
And when they
Yeah.
start declining below youthful levels, the
Mm-hmm.
cellular function is being affected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more that it's not about, being jacked and whatever, being a bodybuilder. It's like, no, you just want to be optimized. You want to be what's the normal healthy level. And if you can get that naturally, great. If you can't, you really want to optimize with supplementation because it's going to affect every aspect of your life.
Yeah, a lot of people, a lot of times I'll pose a question to my patients. So what organ system has the most testosterone receptors? And they always get it wrong. They say the muscles, and it's like the brain. It affects your behavior. It changes your feelings of well-being. I mean, when you get to that point where your testosterone has declined enough, and it most likely is not when you reach the FDA hypogonadal state, okay,
Mm-hmm.
where insurance is supposed to pay for your testosterone.
Mhm.
90% of my patients I have on off-label use for partial androgen deficiency of the male, which doesn't
Mhm.
even exist as a ICD-10 code, okay? It's a made-up word, but that's what they have.
Mhm.
They're not
Mhm.
androgen deficient according to the FDA indication, but they're deficient enough that they're symptomatic. And so we go through a fairly long aging male symptom questionnaire. And if the symptoms are fitting and the numbers are less than optimal, it's like, hey, let's try a trial of therapy. And I have
Mhm.
very few failures when those two criteria are met.
Mhm.
Somebody with suboptimal numbers and symptomatology, and I get them at the upper 25th percentile of healthy 25-year-old males, they all are like, yeah, this is pretty amazing, doc.
Mhm.
So
Mm,
that's
that's
that in a
awesome.
nutshell. Hormones matter. And then, you should find a doc if you're interested to have in-depth understanding of your health. There are liquid biopsy studies to search for cancer that I think I can get behind, though there's some false positives and false negatives. The Prenovo study is pretty interesting because not only do you screen for cancers, but you learn a lot about your joints and stuff because it's an MRI of your whole body. I'm getting ready to do an advanced microbiome test that's going to tell me every virus, fungus, parasite, and bacteria in my stool, and then load that into an AI platform that knows all 22,000 peer-reviewed studies on the microbiome. And then AI advises you how to fix the holes in your gut.
Wow.
And the company that offers it, they didn't want any commercial bias. They do not make a probiotic. They just tell you what bacteria you need. So,
That's
there's
cool.
some advanced testing out there that I think can really help with long-term health strategy. And, if you find somebody that understands how to utilize it, I think that's a great pathway to kind of grasping your best chance at longevity.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Bob, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much. We'll make sure to put those linked in the show notes. I would, if any of this resonated with you, I would definitely recommend people reaching out to you because I know you've lived it and you've gotten great results. So you're the real deal. Thank you so much, Bob. This is on the spot, but any of our Lifestyle Dentist community members, is there any special rate or special salmon, something if they reach out?
Yeah, you mean if somebody, I'll do something. I mean, I can always give a 10% discount on lodging at the lodge for like if you came, Garth. I mean, my network of people, I've got partners in the lodge, so we've agreed, hey, when we bring our own buds in, we give 10% off on lodging. So I would be more than glad to do that on the lodge part if they want to come see me in Alaska. And yeah, I probably would drop my price down to my previous pricing. So my price to be seen for an annual evaluation or for a first time evaluation is $39.99, and I drop that down to $34.99 for your guys or any other Go Bros. And then usually the annuals I charge $500 less because it's not nearly as time consuming. Although these guys are all going to know most of what I'm trying to teach these people in that first interface. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I'm trying to teach them about all the things that we just discussed.
Yeah.
This podcast went so well. I thought the flow was so good that I may just tell my patients, hey, before we go over your annual, I'd like you to go watch this podcast that I did with
Yeah.
Dr. Garth,
Yeah.
And by the way,
Well,
I love you, Dennis. You take
thank
care
you.
of my teeth. There's a significant, you guys, I know you understand all of this. Periodontal disease is a big driver of cardiovascular disease.
Yes.
My dentist is one of my patients and I'm one of his,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely. Well, no, I couldn't agree more. And thank you so much, Bob. And that's a great value. With my initial functional medicine program was much more expensive than that. So that's some great value. So thank you.
Yeah, we're not terribly expensive. We do, that includes a DEXA scan, a VO2 max test, carotid intima media thickness measurement, CNS vital signs, a performance health coach discussion for about an hour while the doc's digesting the diagnostics. We got the labs in advance. The labs are quite expanded. Everything I told you, plus hormones, IGF-1, thyroid studies, sex hormones, cortisol, the inflammatory markers, complete blood. So it's a it's a much deeper scrutiny.
Awesome.
The advanced cholesterol testing with the fractionated panel, that's all part of the initial assessment. So you understand your risk. You've got the first picture of, hey, let's actually look at the arteries. Oh no, let's just wait around. I mean, I got a little diagram here that says, by the way, first sign of coronary artery disease, 1 in 8 people, they're dead.
Yeah,
that's kind of a big fumble.
That is a big
Whoops,
fumble.
too late.
I know.
You had some blockages.
Well, I definitely, when you talk about wealth, besides your relationships with, with God and the people you love, I think health is right there with that. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything, so it's so important to prioritize your health.
I have a fair amount of patients that have a lot of wealth and really don't do nearly as good a job on their health as they should. And they frustrate me because they're so driven by wealth that they won't carve that, hey, I brush my teeth, I exercise. I know with conviction I am exercising today. I mean, I don't wake up wondering that,
Right.
It's like, no, it's built into my life and it is not negotiable. And they just can't get to that. And it frustrates me, Yeah. They feel better on hormones and they don't want to quit the program. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not exercising. I told you that's the biggest benefit to testosterone therapy. It's not that it makes you chase your wife around more, but it does. It's not that it even reduces insulin sensitivity, but it does. It's its ability to enhance the lifestyle prescription of exercise. That's the biggest bonus. And so if you get on testosterone and don't start exercising, you're giving up the real benefit.
Yeah.
It makes you able to exercise. It gives you more drive to exercise. And more importantly, it allows you to recover from it faster because it's anabolic and it lets you repair that broke down muscle tissue more quickly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's
Man,
so
I
important.
really appreciate you having me, Garth. This worked out great.
You're awesome, Bob. No, thank you so much, my friend. I'll be talking to you soon. And for all our lifestyle dentists, thanks so much for joining us. Take care.
Great to see you guys. Thanks.